Good afternoon and welcome to the Maryland Realtors CEO Roundtable webinar with Maryland Realtors CEO Chuck Caskey. Chuck is the CEO of Maryland Realtors, the largest professional trade association in Maryland. Prior to becoming CEO, Chuck was the association's Senior Vice President of Legal Affairs. As CEO, in addition to overseeing the association's operations, he works closely with volunteer leadership to develop and implement policies and initiatives to promote the real estate industry and private property rights. Under his leadership, the association's primary focus has continued to be representing member interests before the legislature and advocating realtor professionalism with members and the public. Prior to joining Maryland Realtors, Chuck practiced law, was counsel to several committees of the General Assembly, and the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Howard County. He earned the Realtor Certified Executive Designation from NAR in September of 2010.
Thanks, Mel. That was Melissa Lutz, everybody. Thank you. I thought you were going to do the short version. I think that was the long version. Anyway, thank you all for thanks for coming. We have a good crowd, and I do appreciate you participating in the inaugural CEO Roundtable webinar. We kind of came up with this idea as a way of keeping members informed. I used to travel around the state a lot more than I am able to now, teaching and whatnot. And so we've decided that this was a good alternative. I still like seeing you all, so if you need me to come and visit, please invite me. I do love seeing the members face to face, but we thought this would be a good idea and a good way to reach a lot of people. So thanks again. Please ask your questions, type them in. Melissa and Mary, our staff, will be curating the questions, so I can't promise every single question will get answered, but we're open even, if we have to go past the hour allotted, that's fine. And you can always email us after the webinar if you have additional questions. We're always available, hopefully, as you already know. So these are the things I'm going to cover, and I won't be talking about the forms. I just wanted to let you all know that, as we approach midsummer toward late summer, we're wrapping up. Colette Massengale, our staff to the Statewide Forms Committee, is wrapping up, and the committee's wrapping up its work. And as you know, Colette will send out the documents and then prepare her videos that she does to let you know what all the changes are. And typically then we have even another webinar in the early fall to let you all know what the changes to the forms have been. So I'm not going to belabor that, but I will cover these things. Some of it's a little bit inside baseball as far as the governance and stuff, so I'll go over that kind of quickly. But I did want to touch on especially a couple of things that happened in the 2019 Maryland General Assembly. We had a good session. If you had a chance to read my article in the magazine from a couple of months ago, I talked about our advocacy, and sometimes we consider, we know we have a win when we pass a law like this one that accomplishes something we want to accomplish that we think is important, and that's a clear win. We had a few instances this year where a bill, didn't pass, and that's a win, especially if we think it's a bad bill and we work hard and the bill doesn't pass. That's a win for us. It's kind of an invisible one because you may not even know about it, but we work hard, and Bill Castelli and Susan Mitchell, our government affairs staff, work really hard to make sure that those kinds of things don't happen. We also, every once in a while, have a bill that comes and it's gonna pass, but we do our best to make it not as bad as it could be. And we consider that a win. Oftentimes people don't. Septic legislation is a pretty good example of that if you follow that over the years. Our septic regulations are pretty strict, but they could have been much more strict, and we do a good job of trying to manage that. This bill on escrow agreements is something that we've been hearing about for a long time, and you all have been dealing with this, really since the downturn. So 07, 08, when there was the number of transactions in which title companies typically, or it could be anybody, but typically the title company is holding the earnest money deposit, not a broker. Not that long ago, everybody just assumed that the buyer was going to submit an offer, a check for a deposit. If the contract was accepted, the buyer's broker would hold the deposit. And the Real Estate Brokers Act contains all of the requirements for brokers in terms of placing the money in their escrow account within 7 days. The requirement that, we've imposed, the Brokers Act doesn't actually say that, but we've always taught that if the check doesn't clear, if it bounces, for example, the buyer's agent has to immediately call the listing agent and make that known, because the buyer is now in breach of the contract. And typically then listing agent hopefully and typically would give the buyer a chance to make it good. But and the additional requirements in the Brokers Act, for example, that we simply require a mutual release of deposit agreement before the broker distributes the deposit. And that's all well and good. We all know that. We learn it all the time. Brokers know it. You all know it. But when title companies started to hold significant amounts of deposits, we started getting calls like, hey, what rules apply to title companies? Even if we call, if I'm the listing agent and I call, title company's holding the deposit, I know there's a check, and I'm supposed to call, I'm the listing agent, I'm supposed to call the title company to make sure the check was good, etc. And I do. Let's say I'm the listing agent and I call the title company and say, hey, I'm the listing agent on that deal. You got the check, right? The buyer submitted the check for the deposit. You have the check, right? And did you deposit it? Was it good funds, etc.? And sometimes the title company would say, well, no, we got it, but I don't know if it's good because we haven't deposited it yet. And this could be weeks later. And the fact of the matter is, there was nothing requiring them to do that. There was nothing requiring them to call you if the check was bad. And there was nothing really in law requiring them to have a mutual release of deposit agreement before they distributed the deposit if the transaction didn't settle. Most of them did, but the point is there wasn't any legal requirement that they do that. So we've been working for several years now, really, with the title industry to have a law passed that says, well, what we ended up with kind of as a compromise was, at the very least, the title company and the buyer and seller have to have a written agreement that tells the parties what's going to happen in this transaction vis-a-vis the deposit and the title company who is not subject to the Brokers Act, what happens. And so what the bill says is, starting October 1st, and you should all, start gearing up for this to the extent you're not already using it, be prepared, because as of October 1st, it's a requirement of Maryland law that the parties sign one of these agreements. And what we did, we drafted the bill so that it not only requires a written agreement, but it contains it specifies what the agreement must address or contain. And as you can see, it's basically what's in the Brokers Act, in addition to the requirement that the escrow agent notify the parties if the check bounces. So hopefully this brings some certainty, basically tracks the Brokers Act. Requires them, it doesn't say it here, but it requires them to deposit it within 7 days. It also requires them to get a mutual release signed before there's a distribution. In anticipation of this, hopefully you're familiar with this form that the Forms Committee created a couple of years ago now, and kudos to Colette Massengale for putting this together. As you can see, it already contains, we kind of wrote the bill to mirror what we'd already done in the agreement. And this has been out there for a couple of years now on a voluntary basis. So the good news is the law is going to require a written agreement, and we already have the written agreement. And as you can see at the top, it's co-branded by Maryland Realtors and the Maryland Land Title Association, or MLTA. That is the trade group that represents the title industry. And we worked with them collaboratively to come up with this agreement. Hopefully everybody's familiar with it and is comfortable with it, and is ready on October 1st to make sure that it's in place in every transaction in which a third party is holding the deposit. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, type them up, send them in. Sometimes what happens in the webinars is by the time you think of the question, get it typed up, send it in. We look at it, Melissa and Mary, forward it on to me. It's possible we could have moved on to another topic. So be prepared for me to jump back to something I said a few minutes ago in order to address a question that probably, hopefully is on your minds. So I'll be able to do that. So just follow me. Let's see what I did. Okay. The next bill that was important to us, in other words, was really an initiative of Maryland Realtors this year, was a bill on confidentiality that, we had thought, I personally have been teaching this, and I know a lot of people that have, for example, been teaching agency. I've been teaching agency now for 14 years, and when I first read the Brokers Act, and this is the definition, of course, of confidential information, that the buyer or seller will accept more or pay less, the motivations of the what led the buyer to buy, seller to sell, again, motivations, divorce, moving jobs, a job move, whatever it is. Negotiating strategies. As you all know, that's the statutory definition of confidential information. So once you're in possession of confidential information, you can't disclose that information to any other party without your client's consent. And as the law is currently written, it says that, right? So it applies to clients. And however, we have always taught that if you go out, and this applies to a prospective buyer or seller, for ease of discussion, we'll talk about a prospective seller. You go out on a listing appointment, you sit down at the table with the prospective seller, and you start talking. And you know this better than anybody, certainly better than I, but they're going to start telling you stuff. They're going to start telling you why they're moving. They're going to start telling you, well, what kind of net they hope to get. And by definition, that's confidential information, right? Except they're not clients yet. But we have always taught, and I believe very strongly, that if there is an expectation of confidentiality, then you should treat that information as confidential. In other words, if you hear all of this stuff from a prospective seller who's interviewing several realtors, you don't get the listing. Fortuitously enough, a buyer comes along and is interested in this house. And you know all this stuff. And you think to yourself, hey, what about all that stuff I learned about this seller when I interviewed for the listing, didn't get it. Now that I actually represent this buyer, don't I owe that buyer the duty to use that information to the buyer's benefit? And while that sounds good on its face, looking behind that, it's really, the answer is no, it's not a good idea. In fact, it's a bad idea. Because clearly that seller only told you that information with the expectation that it would not then be used against them at a later date. Otherwise, they wouldn't have told you. So for example, if you went in and said, be careful what you say to me, because if I don't get the listing and I find a buyer, I'm going to use all that information against you. Well, we would never say that to sellers, nor should we. So the best way for us to address this was to say that information, if it meets the statutory definition of confidential information, applies to information you obtain in anticipation of forming a brokerage relationship. This is not unique to the country. It's not new. There are a lot of states that have very similar laws to protect consumers, and we think it's reasonable. It's easy enough to identify, and hopefully, it's not a big change for anybody, because you're comfortable, frankly, with the fact that we've been teaching this obviously for years. The code also says the confidentiality survives agency. So if you had a listing, let's suppose you got the listing and you had the listing for 6 months, and then the seller, takes it off the market or whatever, that listing expires. If you have and let's say it goes back on the market with another agent, another broker gets the listing, and now it's back on the market. Now you have a buyer for the house you used to have listed. You can't use that information to the advantage of your new buyer client, to the detriment of your old seller client. The code has always said confidentiality survives termination of the relationship. So it also has always applied in certain circumstances to non-clients after the relationship. So all we're saying is, if you obtain the same information before you create the agency relationship, or the brokerage relationship as we now call it, that's confidential. So we don't think it's a sea change. We think it's just really a clarification of something that we've always taught. So that's that one. Those were our two big bills this year. And we had a couple of somewhat smaller initiatives, but those were the two big ones. So again, I'm not seeing any questions yet, but send them on if you have any. We worked hard for the mortgage debt cancellation, the permanent set of it at least. And this is when in short sales, because we still have short sales, and many of you know, I don't have to tell you, we still have short sales. And the forgiven debt in a short sale, so if you have a short sale and there's a deficit, and the lender approves the short sale, forgives the balance of the mortgage, that, all things being equal, the forgiven debt is income to that former homeowner. And up until last year, even under federal law, that debt was not taxable. Otherwise, it is, and then for 2018, it was taxable as ordinary income. And that was a big shock to a lot of people back in 07, 08. The original bill passed in 09, passed Congress at least. And it wasn't ever an issue in Maryland then, because if it was not income for your federal income tax purposes, when you transferred all that information over to your state taxes, it was by virtue of that exclusion also excluded from state income tax, Maryland state income tax. Congress reapproved this over the years, and for 10 years that was federal law. It was usually passed for 2 years at a time or whatever, and this most recent tax bill did not pass. And so I'm sorry, they're saying I have questions. I'm going to have to look. Excuse me for 1 second. So you can speak up. It's all right. Bring that down. It's not going down. Oh my God, there are questions. There they are. Thank you, Mary. I didn't have my screen expanded enough. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm going to finish this thought. I have a couple questions on the escrow agreements and one on confidentiality and so other. So let me finish this thought, then we'll go back. The Congress did not reauthorize the exemption from federal income tax for 2018, which means that there were homeowners who were filling out their 2018 taxes in early 2019 who had to pay income tax on forgiven debt. Anecdotally, I don't know how widespread that was. Frankly, we did not get the number of news stories that I thought we were going to get. I have to be honest with you. I thought we would be hearing the howls of, angst from people who were stuck with these enormous tax bills because it's a 1099 and you get, $20,000, $30,000 1099 in the mail that you have to pay income tax on, and you don't have the money saved to pay the taxes, puts people in a lot of a bind. And so we didn't really hear that. And that bill, again, Congress theoretically could even extend it again and even retroactively, and then throw a bunch of people into having to do amended returns, et cetera. And that could still happen. But in any event, once it was obvious that Congress may not extend it, we went ahead and asked the Maryland General Assembly to create a state exemption that would operate independently and take effect if the federal government did not have an exemption in place. So what we did, and this is now permanent law. It used to track federal law and expire when federal law expired, but now we convinced the General Assembly that this is a good thing to have in Maryland tax law on a permanent basis. So from now till forever, until it's changed at least, under Maryland income tax law, forgiven debt within those limits is excludable from state income tax, leaving aside the federal exclusion for a minute. So $100,000 worth of debt for an individual, $200,000 for joint, that up to that amount is not taxable under Maryland income tax, Maryland state income tax law. And that's, again, a permanent part of the law. So let's check up on a couple of questions. The escrow agreement, well, somebody said an addendum. It's not an addendum. And so the person who asked the question is right, and it's not an addendum. It's never been touted as an addendum. It's never been advertised as an addendum to the contract. This is a separate standalone agreement between the buyer, the seller, and the escrow agent. So don't attach it to contracts. Don't make it part of an offer. Don't make it part of a counter offer. This is a separate agreement. If you're the buyer's agent and the buyer is, and the seller sign the contract, and in the deposit paragraph, it says to deposit by way of blank, or in this amount, to be held by, and you all, the parties fill in to be held by a title company, and the parties agree to that. The next thing you should do is make sure the buyer and the seller have a copy of this that they can all get signed by the buyer, seller, and the title company. So it is not part of the contract. It's a separate contract, a separate agreement. Obviously, you're going to want a copy of it to keep in your files so that they're complete files. But this is not, again, part of the contract. There was a question about presumed agent situation where I have to keep confidential information of a customer. No, the answer is no. This is not presumed agency. This is not agency at all. This is simply saying, as a matter of consumer protection, that information you get from a consumer with the expectation of confidentiality, you have to keep it confidential. Okay, so I don't think this is, you know, a new version of presumed agency. So, another question: does this include credit card debt forgiven? No. The answer is no. The law applies in the definition of qualified mortgage in debt, and so in order to be eligible for the exclusion, the debt had to be part of a loan that was used to acquire or improve real property. So credit card debt, forgiven credit card debt, is still income. Question on the confidentiality: could we have handled, as we do with an advisory, we give visitors that as an open house? I mean, I think, could we have, there certainly could have been a couple of different approaches, but I think I answered the question in terms of how productive would your meeting be with the seller if you went in and said, first of all, I don't represent you, you're not my client, therefore nothing you tell me is covered under the rules of confidentiality, and so therefore, you know, be careful what you tell me, because if I don't get the job and then I have a buyer for this house and you list it with another company, I'm going to use that information against you. Now, you know, if you're going to tell me anything like your negotiating strategies, et cetera, you're not going to get the listing. You've just lost that business. And so, you know, we actually thought about that, but we chose the approach that we chose. And we think it probably helps consumers also. Question on the timing of the handling of the escrow agreement. If I was the seller, I would want the title company to sign it before I sign the contract of sale, agreeing to allow them to hold it. I mean, if the title company to sign before, if I was the seller, well, sure. I mean, if the buyer has chosen the title company and the seller and buyer have already agreed in the contract to allow the title company to hold it, the timing of signing, who signs first and who signs last, you know, I'm going to leave that up to you. I don't really have strong feelings about that one way or the other. And so, yeah, I don't really have a whole lot of other comment on that. Sorry, Brian. The question is the tax forgiven for 2019? No, it wasn't for 18, and it's not going to be for 2019 as of today. It's not. So that for federal income tax purposes, that's the point. That's why we had the state law passed, so that we could at least be sure that forever that debt's not taxable for state income tax purposes. Okay. Again, our fourth big issue, one that I think is gonna, one of the most interesting ones we talked to, it's actually, I find it interesting, is remote notary. Electronic signatures, many of you I know are very comfortable using electronic signatures, as well you should be. These, you know, 10 years from now, there's not going to be, you know, nobody's going to take to a pencil or a pen, excuse me, you know, a pen and sit down at a settlement table and sign a bunch of documents. They're going to be smart contracts, electronically signed. Everything's going to be done electronically. And, you know, today we have electronic signatures, and with a notary can notarize those electronic signatures electronically under our e-sign laws. And so, but as of today, the notary has to be in the room. That's the difference. So we have electronic notary, but the notary has to be there. What this bill says, and if you want to write that link down, there's a YouTube video on how remote notary works. It's pretty interesting. What's going to happen is, starting in 2021, the notary will be able to be in a remote location, hence the name. And it'll be done by a video link. So the buyer and the seller can be in two different places, and the notary can be in a third remote location, linked in by a video conferencing. And this notaries will be trained on this. We'll have the technology in place. That's why the delayed effective date, to give the Secretary of State time to develop the technologies. And the notary, there are ways to verify the people are who they say they are, and it's recorded, and the recording is required to be kept for 10 years. And this is going to untie us from a lot of the current requirements and still have a the confidence that the people are who they say they are. Okay. Team advertising. This, I can tell you that this bill passed. This did not come from us. We did not initiate this, but it allows teams, in addition to the phrase team or group, to designate themselves. They'll now be able to use the phrase and associates. I'm moving a little fast now because I want to catch up and get to the other things we have to talk about. Notice of easement law, conservation easement. What we're trying to do here, and this was a departmental bill that authorizes entities to file the easements. We are looking seriously at the issue of easements or any other kinds of restrictions on property, whether it's covenants, easements, other kinds of restrictions that buyers are not aware of until after they've settled on the property. And this is one way. Hopefully these are state government entities that own these easements, and hopefully they will record them. And even if they're recorded, they will re-record them, because title searches only go back so far. And a lot of these are not known to buyers, and frankly, to be honest, and to be fair, not necessarily even known to sellers. And then, however, buyers are stuck with the requirements of the restrictions. You know, usually all know horror stories. You know, you put up a fence that's not required under the covenants. You have to take the $20,000 fence down, and you didn't even know it was a violation of a covenant until some neighborhood group comes around and tells you. So we're going to be looking at that this year, and hopefully have some suggestions for how to make these things discoverable in the land records so buyers are aware of them. Okay, so keep on the lookout for that. These are the state entities that are required to follow the law, or allowed to do that. These are authorizing legislation. It's not a requirement. Update on flood insurance. There's another temporary extension for flood insurance, and we don't really see Congress biting the bullet and having a permanent solution anytime soon. So we are going to look at what we can do in Maryland to at least move the ball forward in a meaningful way, maybe even get some of the private insurance companies to write policies instead of relying on the National Flood Insurance Program. All I can tell you is we keep pressing Congress for a meaningful long-term solution. We are also now looking at more localized state solutions so that we don't have to keep worrying and wondering whether Congress is ever going to fix it permanently. So it's a big ask, and it's a big, it's a complicated issue, but we're going to be looking at that. Briefly, an update on some happenings around the Maryland Realtors. At our June Board of Directors meeting, there were 2 bylaw amendments approved, the most significant being a change from nominating committee to a credentials committee. If you've been through the process, even at the local real estate realtor board, realtor association level, you know that there is usually a nominating committee. People apply, only one person comes through the nominating committee, and then a lot of times the person left out doesn't feel like they really had a chance to make their case. And so starting with the 2021 elective year, in other words, the election that will happen in September of 2020, this is the new procedure. And we're going to put out a lot of information about this ahead of early 2020 when this thing takes effect. But in effect, there is no more nominating committee. We have in our bylaws certain requirements in order to be run and able to run for office. You have to be a primary Realtor member for 5 years and some other things, served on the board of directors and other requirements. Starting next year, as long as you meet those requirements, you are declared eligible to run for office. And campaigns will start when the candidates are notified and eligibility is determined. So beginning April 20th of 2020, anybody who wants to run for office here at Maryland Realtors will then be able to campaign for that office. And if it's 2 or 3 or 4 people, then, you know, they do their best and the best person wins. So we have a policy manual, we have guidance on how to conduct campaigns. There's a whole new process in place that I'm excited about. I think it's great, and I think it's going to improve our pool of candidates. And you don't have to go waiting to get through this nominating committee process. You go right to the local boards and campaign. And again, we'll be sharing a lot more information with you about that as we get into the year. Well, the other bylaw amendment added a position on the board of directors and the executive committee. Starting October 1st, there will be a local association executive on the board of directors and the executive committee. The thinking is that there is a perspective here. A lot of the policies that get adopted at the state level certainly have an impact on local boards, and the state board of directors wants to hear that perspective and get input from the local association staff perspective. And so now there will be a seat at the table for local AEs to bring us that perspective. The position is a non-voting position, and that person will not participate in executive sessions, but still it's a seat at the table, and the person will be available to provide input and that perspective. So hopefully that will improve our decision making. Mary Tobin is our current president. She has been very busy. I said we had a great session. She testified on bills. We had other things that we did. The governance PAG, which resulted in the changes to the bylaws, as I said, talking about the credentials committee. We had a very successful Women in Real Estate conference. I hope some of you were able to attend. We also had an environmental law session at the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Center that was very successful, and we got to see a very beautiful, Seabeck is a very beautiful place. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. We talked about critical area law and flood insurance mapping, and that's something that maybe we'll do on an annual basis, remains to be seen, but I would like to believe we could do that. Mary also appointed a presidential advisory group, or PAG or PAG, to look at the annual conference. And, you know, we're not going to get into the details too much about who approves or disapproves of the annual conference being here or there. The point is that we had been doing the same thing year after year after year for 35 or 40 years, and there was a lot of sentiment for trying something new, that the formulas, you know, at some point have to change. Formats have to change. Change is hard. It wasn't universally popular moving the conference to the National Harbor, but there's a lot of people who do admit that the old model and the old formula just wasn't working all that well. So we are starting from scratch. There's a group of people working very, very hard at coming up with new ideas and new thoughts, and the annual conference committee will be looking at all those things. Mary will be looking at all those things. John Harrison, next year's president, will be looking at all these things. And so just want you all to know that it's probably going to change again at some point, and of course we'll let you know, but we are thinking about this stuff and we are working on it, so hopefully for the good. Real quick on housing outlook, you all know most of this, so I won't belabor it, except to say that we're in the third year now, of a solid recovery, maybe more, and we just seem to be plugging along. The prices, home prices are steadily increasing. Sales have been down the last couple of months, so that means prices are going to continue to rise. Thankfully, they've been rising steadily, so nobody's using the word bubble anymore, but the National Association of Realtors reported last month that in June, the average price the median price reached a record high of $285,700, up 4.3% from the previous June. That's national. That's why those numbers don't match what's on your screen, the national numbers. So, prices are increasing. Sales were down to at least some large extent due to the Baltimore City ransomware attack that basically shut down the recording of deeds. So obviously that had a negative impact. But sales were down actually nationally as well, but only by 1.7%. Although, that's a recipe for really a lack of affordability. And that's what we're seeing. And this is going to continue to happen. I mean, this is supply and demand, the continued low inventory, and the steadily increasing prices are going to squeeze, especially first-time buyers, and that's going to have ultimately a negative impact on the market and the economy in general. So where we go from here, it's anybody's guess. We just don't know. We're going to keep an eye on it. New home building has to increase. But so does the inventory of affordable homes and homes for first-time buyers. And that's where we seem to be stuck. There's some creative stuff going on around the country. We'll see what happens in Maryland. But if you are reading the newspapers, places like Seattle, Washington, I think, just basically eliminated single-family zoning. And so every property can be multifamily dwelling, and that's one way of looking at it. I know in Massachusetts, old homes were condoed years ago, and so there's a lot of new ideas out there. We'll see what happens here in Maryland, but affordable housing or housing opportunity is still going to be an issue given this market. Most markets, again, are pretty strong, but we're going to have to keep an eye on some of that stuff. I want to touch briefly on some risk management trends. Don't have any. There's a question here I might have to get to later. The issues that keep you up at night, this should be at the top of everybody's list. Wire fraud, you can't pick up a newspaper. Once a week, there's a horror story about a home buyer who fell victim to yet another fraud. And I get emails from you, I get emails from my colleagues in the title industry, and I tell you, a lot of us have done a really good job of putting in our emails. I saw one the other day, not only was it red, it was flashing. Do not accept wire instructions without confirming them via phone or even in person. Because I do not send wire instructions by email. And you say that over and over and over and over again. And just last week, a buyer got alternative wire instructions, wired over $250,000 to a scammer just a couple weeks ago. So it's still going on. We can talk to people till we're blue in the face, but we still have to be vigilant because they're still out there. The same way the ransomware people are out there, and they're just phishing. And even if they get, one in 5,000 tries, they're gonna make money. And so how they get in is really important. So first of all, we can say, I don't send wire instructions by email. I don't. They clone your phone. I heard about that the other day where they sent the wire and then they followed up, and the buyer thought that the call was from the buyer's agent. I don't know how they impersonated them or not, but they somehow cloned the phone, so it looked like the phone number was the buyer's agent's phone number, and convinced them that the wire instructions were actually valid. So there are you can only do so much, but one of the things you can do is 100% of the time these programs get into your system from links or attachments that you have clicked on, and that's how they get in. And so and I teach this, and I do it, and they try to get clever, and we've all gotten those emails where, hey, this looks legit. That's the actual company's logo. That looks like it came from Citibank or whatever. Yeah, I have a credit card with them, and they want something from me. But pay attention, because there's always red flags. Something just doesn't look right, whether it's the placement of the logo or it just looks handmade, or I'll tell you what usually gets my attention is there's typically it's not the best writing. There's some word misusage or something like that, and there's always a red flag. So just pay close attention. Never, ever, ever click on a link or an attachment that you don't know you don't know from whom it came, and you are absolutely convinced. Otherwise, just delete it, and then you know what? If somebody really wants you to pay attention to what they just sent you, they'll find another way to reach you. Keep your operating system and your antivirus updated. Strong passwords and two-factor authentication. A lot of our vendors, a lot of the people that we do business with and with whom we have accounts require two-factor authentication. Is it a pain? Yeah, it's a pain. You have to, what if you're logging in and your phone's in the other room and they're sending you the code? Well, now I got to go and get my phone, and we all have that. And everybody, I don't know about you, I'm pretty guilty. Are my passwords the strongest? Probably not, because, who wants to do that? And so get a program to help you remember your passwords. Michael Cunningham, our IT person, does not recommend storing them in your browser, like most of us do, because that's once they get control of your browser, then they have control of your passwords. So there are separate apps you can use and programs that are safe to store your passwords in. And then, I know it's unsecured Wi-Fi is who hasn't been down to Starbucks or McDonald's or whomever? Everybody has free Wi-Fi now. When you log on to that Wi-Fi, if you pay attention, you look at that connection, it says unsecured. And you log on to it anyway. I do, in hotels, in wherever I am. These are unsecured networks, and you carrying around your phone, your laptop, and you have contracts in there. You have confidential information. You have proprietary information. You have personal, identifying information, and those things are at risk. So please, please, please don't use those unsecured Wi-Fi networks. I do have a, we'll train the trainers, be taught about the new confidentiality rules. The answer is yes, that'll be incorporated into the updated agency law, agency class that the commission is working on as we speak. Texting and calling, please be aware that the Do Not Call list and the Telephone Consumer Protection Act protect us. I don't know about you, but I get 5 or 6 unsolicited phone calls a day, and so we know that's not working because my phone is connected, and I registered my phone to the Do Not Call list, but I still get it. So that's not perfect. If you're going to use text messages, then you need to comply with this law, that you get consent, and you provide for the opt-out. If you're using calling, then you have to make sure that people you're calling are not on the Do Not Call list. There's a link to a video from NAR, talks about the texting and the TCPA. If you're doing calling, you must be sure that people are not on the Do Not Call registry, and you can update that, or you can get the updated list on a monthly basis at donotcall.gov. Real quick, let me talk a little bit about what the future looks like here. We have some pretty big plans for the next couple of years. One thing that I've seen, and we've all seen this, data, right? I mean, that's you make decisions based on data. You make good decisions based on good data. It's hard to make decisions without good data. Big data is everywhere. All you have to do is shop for something and then open your browser and have, ads for the thing you just bought pop up in your browser to know that they know everything about you. If you're not using secure or anonymous browsing, which, well, a lot of us don't. People are collecting data on us all the time. And you hear the words predictive analytics, the next big trend in big data is predictive analytics. And they're already doing it. They know that if you bought this, 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 and this, that you're likely to want to buy this in 3 or 4 months. And they're going to start sending you ads for the thing that you didn't even know you needed until you see it and say, oh yeah, I needed that. In marketing, that's being done now. In real estate, it's starting to be done now. There's so much data about us out there. There are companies now, and they're going to start selling this to the real estate industry, predicting who will be selling their house within the next, say, 2 to 3 years or 2 to 4 years, whatever it is. And they're going to know this based on all of your demographic information. They're going to know how old your kids are. They're going to know that how old your car is, that you're going to need a new car. They're going to know, what your income is. If you're in a big house and you're now an empty nester, because they know how old your kids are, they're going to say, hey, maybe it's getting to be about time where these people are going to downsize, and they're going to predict that you're going to want to put your property on the market in the next 2 to 5 years, whatever, and they're going to start selling that. And real estate brokers are going to start buying that data, and they're going to start getting ahead of the curve and start farming people. And again, maybe they haven't even thought about moving yet, but they get a cold call or whatever. Hey, if you're thinking about selling, and the next thing you know, people are, hey, you know what? This house is a little too big for us. Maybe we should start thinking about it. So that's coming. It's here, but they're getting better and better and better at it as they get more and more data on us. So we're thinking the same kind of thing applies to us as a realtor organization. We we get data, but we don't really, I have to be very honest with you, we don't get great data. We don't get volumes of data about consumers, about you, our members, just to help you. We don't really, we ask you on occasion by surveys. They're not scientific surveys. You know, what do you want from us? How are we doing? How do you want to hear from us? It's SurveyMonkey, you know, and whoever answers it, we go along and say, oh, well, they answered the survey, so it must be true. But they're not scientific surveys. And we could use some really much better demographic data about our members. Would really like to know who they are, how they're doing. NAR does a national member survey, so we know what the average age, you know, 53-year-old woman making $41,000 a year. So we know who they are nationally, but we'd really like to know who they are in Maryland. Who are we working for? How can we make better decisions to give better value, better programs and services to our members? And we need the data to do that. And so we are embarking on a in-house a system of a team. I'm putting a team together, a data strategy team to identify our needs, what kinds of decisions we make based on sometimes just assumptions or hunches instead of good data. And then what data could we use to make better decisions? And then where do we get that data and how do we use it? And so we're going to do that. I'm excited about it. We're starting that as we speak, and you'll be hearing more about that. And you may be surveyed. You may be one of the lucky ones to get one of our pollsters to survey you, and hopefully we can really get much better information about our members. We see a need out there for raising the bar as far as property management goes. We know that a lot of our members are engaging in property management. We know that a lot of the complaints at the Real Estate Commission are property management related. And so we are working on creating a Maryland property management certification. This will be hopefully rolled out first or second quarter of 2020. We have a lot of work to do on it. It's going to be a robust program. It may even be 2 levels, one an intermediate level and then one a higher level of certification that requires an actual, you know, certain number of transactions or whatever. A lot of these decisions haven't been made yet, but that's the vision. And then this will be a way for people to distinguish themselves within the industry as having this expertise. And hopefully, you know, this leads to some additional communication and education of consumers about what's at stake when they hire somebody to manage a property or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. So that's a big initiative of ours that will be hopefully rolling out early or to mid next year. We will be offering the realtor safety classes around the state. It's a big initiative of John Harrison, our 2020 president. We're working on the details of that, and we'll probably be offering that around the state, or those could be more than one, kind of like we did with the professionalism class. Hopefully a lot of you took with Deb Hudson as we sponsored that and offered that to local boards. Hopefully we can use that as a model for how to distribute the realtor safety classes. If local boards are not already doing that, then we'll be able to bring those around the state and offer them to people. Our information channels, like webinars, we have the magazine, you know, we have our videos, which are 100 times better than they were a few years ago. We've increased the professionalism in our videos, and they're very, very popular. The magazine is still popular. The hot sheet is popular. The webinars are popular. And so we're looking for more and more channels, more and more ways to reach our members, because we have to be an all of the above kind of organization. We have members of literally every demographic and every age group, every type of person wants to get their information, and they want it in a different way. And one thing we are not doing as of today is podcasts. Interestingly enough, just 3 or 4 days after we started talking about this in-house, I heard an article, or I heard a story that somebody said we are now at peak podcast, where there's just not any room in the space for any new podcasts. I'm going to go ahead and dispute that because I think our members are probably, if we target them properly and we give them good information, then, and God knows we spend enough time in our cars, so we want to make productive use of our time. It doesn't have to be in your car, but that's when I listen to podcasts mostly. Like, let's provide that as yet another channel so we can distribute information to members. So you'll be seeing the inaugural podcast within the next 4 or 5 weeks. So stay on the lookout. They'll be short, 20 minutes, 25 minutes at the most, and we won't bombard you with them. So hopefully you'll subscribe and you'll get notification if there's a new one. I don't see this being once a month. Maybe if something big's happening, maybe twice a month, but no more frequently than that. We won't bombard you with that, and you'll be able, of course, to pick and choose what you want to listen to. The last thing I'll touch on, I've gone over a little bit. Thanks for sticking with me. Most people have. Appreciate that. And send in other questions if you have them. I just went through the whole thing. One of the things we know everybody cares about is healthcare. And we are looking at all kinds of healthcare options. Nationally, as you know, if you get information from the National Association of Realtors, they are sending out action items and surveys and stuff on association health plans, AHPs. Association health plans were authorized by Department of Labor regulations about 18 months ago. It's a wildly complicated issue, and I can't distill it down and make a whole lot of sense of it, except to say that we are looking into it. We are looking into all of our options. Maryland has some laws that are very unique in the country. We have both our laws and we have arrangements with the federal government that really stand us apart from the rest of the country. There are a couple of things, waivers of different kinds, Medicare, Medicaid waivers, that we're the only state in the country that has them. And when we give people information about whether an association health plan is viable here, or whether our health benefits exchange is the best place for you to go to get health insurance. And again, we don't know that, but that's what we're looking into. How can we minimize the number of our members that don't have health insurance? And that's a perfect example of the first point about us being a data-driven organization. We know nationally 13% of the members, 1.3 million realtors, 13% are without health insurance. We don't know what that number is in Maryland. And so that's one of the first things that we would want to know. When we do a member survey, we would really like to know how many people are we really talking about? Roughly half don't get insurance from their spouse, a certain number of on Medicare, and some have received insurance on the exchange. So we just don't know. So we're going to find out that first. We're going to look at all the options, and we're going to be putting out a lot of information in the early to mid-fall so that you are able to make informed decisions about healthcare and your options and the prices and how to get health insurance if you want it and hopefully can afford it. So we'll be doing that regardless of the outcome. I will tell you, the Maryland Health Benefits Exchange has reached out to us, and they will be a presence at our conference. They're going to have a booth. They're going to have information available, and hopefully that will be one channel and one avenue for people to explore. And so, again, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. but that's one of the options that we'll be looking at. So hopefully you'll find that valuable. I've passed my time, but I'm happy to stay and answer any other questions if people have them. Mel, do we have any other?
We don't. Just the request to go back to the slide with the YouTube video about the notary.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Just a couple requests for that. Otherwise,
okay.
No. This will be posted on our website within the next few days, and we will send this out via email to everybody so that you can also share this with your colleagues as well.
Yeah, what's fun about this is when you watch it, the test that they give you to prove you're who you say you are is the same kind of test you answer to get your credit report, and or to apply for certain things, and they ask you questions that they get from your credit report, like did you own, what's one of these, the list of cars, and did you have a car loan for one of these cars in the last 5 years? Did you live at this address anytime in the last 10 years? Things like that. A lot of us have had to answer those questions over time. I actually, last time I did one, I got one wrong because it was so long ago. I thought, I don't remember that, and I actually got it wrong. Turns out, you're allowed to get one wrong and still pass the test. That's the kind of test, and you'll see that actually demonstrated in that video. You'll watch the notary quiz the person on the other side of the video link to ensure that they are who they say they are. So, hope that helps. Anything else?
No, that's everything.
Okay. Again, really appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in. And if this was successful, hopefully we'll do it again in the not too distant future. So thanks again for everything you do, and let us know how we're doing and whether you need anything else from us. And with that, good afternoon.